Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to our next webinar series. This time we have Katherine Moore Powell talking to us about Tethys Geoscience and about leveraging the Tethys community. Um, Katherine works with Linker and has been part of the Tethys Geoscience Foundation as one of our board members. Katherine, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Yes. Well, I've done a lot of work from software development. I'm also a environmental scientist, and I've spent a great deal of my career working to do outreach and community. So I continue to work through all those phases. Um, and working with Tethys is something that I started with Linker 6 years ago. So I have a lot of familiarity with the platform, and I've been very excited to be part of this entire development of the Tethys Geoscience Foundation.
Thank you. We are happy to have you. I will turn the time over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. I know it's going to sound like we're going out into the community, but it's really uh, something that is extremely important when you're developing your app, and that is leveraging this open source community. As Jeff mentioned, I'm one of the board members and one of the people involved in creating the Tethys Geoscience Foundation. And today I'm going to focus on how you take whatever app you're developing beyond that development and design and into the real world use and impact. And let's start by talking about why community matters. So you built the app, now what? We're going to talk a little bit about this last mile. I'm obviously simplified. A graphic here at the bottom has you designing and then maybe developing an app. But the deployment, that kind of pulls together all of the parts where you release it into the wild, you give it to the users, and hopefully it is where whatever research or whatever data you're sharing becomes a part of their decision making. This tool is also part of a used system, and hopefully your app becomes impactful and part of the infrastructure for their decision making. So if you've already built an app, or maybe you're planning to, this is something you want to pay attention to. It's a huge challenge to get to the stages after the development. You want people to actually find it, use it, and benefit from it. And, turning that finished tool or product into the type of adoption and sustained use is going to create more challenges than I think maybe even you've anticipated. So let's talk about that last mile problem. Here's an example. So maybe you built a powerful Teth app for flood forecasting. It uses really great models, good data sets, it displays impressive maps and graphs, etc., and does all the predictions needed. You think it's perfect for your users. However, maybe the emergency managers you intended this for don't really use it. This is something that we have seen over and over again, and I've experienced firsthand. It's, a lot of causes going on here. Perhaps it's hard to interpret some of the stuff that you've displayed, or maybe there's just no training or documentation. And I would pull back on that and say, maybe the training and documentation just could be better. But more importantly, and I think that last bullet point says it all, it wasn't introduced through the networks for the users that you intended. And so they don't really know about it, or they don't have as much of a familiarity with its existence as you would like. And there's that gap, that last mile problem. So we talked about some of this in this example, some of the things that could be causing that. But let me expand on that a bit. So obviously low visibility, you didn't do enough promotion, or there's not a way for them to discover your app. But there's plenty of other things too. Even if they do find it, maybe it's not as usable as you think it is. That user interface could be too complex, or more commonly, I've seen unclear workflows going on. So, yeah, they can get in and use it, but maybe it's not as obvious to them how to use it. And that gets into the too technical piece. We've gotten really technical, especially if we're sharing good geoscience data. It can be really important to remember that your users don't always understand the things that you understand, and it's your job to make it clear to them. And then, we don't talk about this enough, but there's this element of trust. And that is, they don't really know who you are, and they don't know why they should trust your app. And kind of embedded in that is context too. Maybe they don't really know when and how to use it. Like, what is the context for them using this? And all this boils down to the engagement, the connecting, and the leveraging of your community has kind of fallen through. You built it for the users, but you didn't really build it with them. So this is one of those areas where the Tethys Geoscience Foundation can actually help you. And, that is why we created this foundation. And it is an open source ecosystem. It's also a really diverse community that's engaged. We have developers who build tools, obviously, but we also have a lot of researchers who are generating data and creating apps to share it. And within that, we also have decision makers that are applying those insights. And very importantly, we have plenty of students who are learning and contributing. And this is part of the sustainable process of keeping this going. Your app could exist within this broader ecosystem. And it's possible that its success will depend on how well you connect with these groups. So understanding their needs is important, but even more is understanding their perspectives. So let's get into a couple of steps here that you could be taking. We'll start with ourselves. We went through our own process of doing this and found that, the community should be first. We've got to listen and, more importantly, learn from that and then grow. So the community that we're talking about, they enable a lot of collaboration, shared learning, and hopefully reuse of a lot of these apps and tools. When your app becomes part of that system, its impact can grow significantly. We spent time, for example, conducting interviews and focusing on the community that this software platform and the entire ecosystem was meant to serve. So here's a couple of bullet points. Not everything that we discovered, but a couple of examples. In those interviews, we found that we could differentiate a few of these groups, 3 of them here, and what it was that they wanted. Scientists and researchers, for example, they just wanted a simple web-based tool that allowed them to do what they needed to do, but they didn't want to become software developers themselves. So it needed to be easy. By way of contrast, though, our developers and contributors, they didn't just want to do developing and contributing. They actually wanted a place to collaborate. And with that, allow them to innovate. And very importantly, get their work seen and actually used. Now, finally, one of the really good examples that we have here would kind of encompass maybe those first 2, but broadly speaking, we're talking about the institutions that are actually probably going to be using these as decision-making tools. So whether it's academic or governmental or nonprofit or whatever, they need something that they can deploy that's robust, perhaps for environmental modeling, decision-making, whatever. They need to know that they can trust it. And so one of the things that we discovered while doing this is the multiple ways that you can share your application. Obviously, I've got some examples here, and we've had, and I've got more to talk about, but we have set up within this community our own ecosystem that you're welcome to leverage. And there's multiple places to share your app. You don't just have to use the Tethys Geoscience Foundation ecosystem, but it's a great starting point. And we can help connect you to some of the other great options, such as GitHub repositories and the different ways that you could really leverage and use those. Obviously, there's project websites. It's really important not to overlook super obvious places that maybe you are familiar with, but you have just you haven't thought about them as a place to share your app. And then obviously, especially if you're a scientist, but I would say even more important, if even if you're not a scientist, is to think about publishing in a peer-reviewed journal. Now, you don't have to be peer-reviewed. There are other journals, but you might be surprised that you'll find a good deal of the community and your audience within these publications. They can be a great way to get the information about your app out there. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but obviously conferences and meetings are a great place to network, but they're also a good place to not only share the existence of your app, but demonstrate how it works. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We have really delved into this extensively within the Tethys Foundation. We found that, you've got to do a lot of networking, but it's the type of networking that you do that's probably more important. There's still software development going on for the Tethys platform that continues today. We have major contributions and updates going on all the time with our talented team members, but we also have a lot of contributors. Now, our goal is not only to build the powerful geospatial web applications to help you to deploy those, but we want to make it easier to discover, deploy, and extend. And that's something that by joining the open source community that we've created can really help you with your app. We've been exploring new ways to distribute open source software more effectively. And part of that comes from the community itself and getting that feedback. So let's focus back on your application. You've made this application. Perhaps you've already done a little bit of sharing. Let's talk about exactly how you might want to go about doing that. And like many things, you want to tell a story. You don't just want to inform people that it's there and it does things. Framing it as a story really helps to get the message across. So if you want to think about telling your story, I've got a couple of questions that could help you figure out how to do that. Think about, what problem does it solve? This is a really, really important way to connect to your community. Because if you haven't defined the problem that you're solving, perhaps you need to go back to the users that you're intending this app to benefit. Clearly stating what problem it solves is going to be a keystone of the story that you want to tell. Then building on that, you want to talk about how your app works, why it matters. So you're not just solving the problem for them, but you're giving them an application that solves it in a particular way, and you want to really expand on why it matters to them. Now, when it comes to that, telling the story, and sharing it broadly, etc., the visuals couldn't be more important. You'll want to have screenshots of your application will really be helpful, simple diagrams, and you'll want to keep any explanations concise. And this word gets kicked around a lot, but it's super important: accessible. Think about what accessibility means. For example, we can tend to think that everybody absorbs the same visuals or the same information the way that we do, but it's really important to talk to people and find out how they might actually interact with your app and the ways that they interact with the stories that you're telling. So I have even more importantly, a couple of ways to engage. some tactics and expanding on what I already introduced, some ways that you can make connections. So a few practical tactics go a long way, which is why I left that pretty short. Um, you'll want to write a short, non-technical summary. So create a quick demo to go with that too, especially it doesn't have to be anything too extensive, but you'd be surprised how important a 1 or 2 minute demo video is. Most importantly, and I can't emphasize this enough, don't just share this once or briefly. It's really important to keep it visible through updates and ongoing communication. So those updates need to be regular. They can be small. As long as you're continuing to do it, you keep it fresh and you're telling your users and your community that you're communicating with that you're open to making changes and to listening to their feedback. So keeping that communication going is really important. The engagement then becomes active. There's many ways to build on these connections as well. So looking at those bullet points below, you'll want to join discussions. Keep in mind, you're not the only one building your app or creating solutions. So join discussions. They don't just have to be technical discussions. They can be all kinds of workshops and discussions. Getting to know the users you're building the app for will help you decide which ones you need to join. And also really important to collaborate. Some of those discussions will lead to that, collaborating on applications. Perhaps you'll have some partners in other organizations that are working on similar things. Really important to look for ways to connect and collaborate. You'll want to look for overlap wherever possible too. Whether it's within, water resources or climate or hazards or whatever discipline you're working in, it's possible that there are people that have important feedback or users or information for you that aren't creating their own applications, but there's overlap there in whatever it is that you're providing. Reach out to people in those similar areas. And presentations and live demos to reach new audiences and build meaningful connections. They really do. You'd be very surprised who might show up to some of these presentations, and the opportunity to not just present your work, but actually listen to the interactions during that presentation. Getting feedback is really important. Let's not forget that you will not only want to reach out to your peers and look for networking opportunities there, but let's engage students and early career users. They are a special valuable collaborators. They're really, many times, especially, in the day and age of AI, they can be much more on the forefront of what's going on. But they're also early adopters, and hopefully they'll be lifelong partners for you. Let's also keep in mind that engagement and looking at all these tactics and these different ways of connecting, it's a two-way process. Don't wait until your app is finished. Share early versions and gather feedback and iterate. This leads to better tools and stronger adoption. Let me talk a little bit more about this focus on the perspective of the user. You're designing this for them. So keep in mind some really important things that can sort of get forgotten during the development process. Your adoption depends really heavily on the usability of your application. You'll want clear interfaces. And that also means that it's not only going to be a really clear visual interface, but that it's usable. And to do that, it's really important to pair that with some great documentation. Also, it can be exceptionally helpful to have well-defined use cases. People really like seeing how the application is used in a practical sense, and it makes it easier for them to understand how they might apply it in their case. And you want to reduce friction wherever possible. So provide sample data sets, perhaps have some deployment options that make it much more simple for them to get started, and guide users with workflows. Show them how they're supposed to use your application. The easier it is for them to start, the more likely they will continue to engage. Let's not forget that while you're connecting, engaging, and really getting your application out there, you don't want to forget to measure the impact that it's having. So think about how you would measure success with your application. There's plenty of uses metrics out there. This is where it's really helpful to actually engage this community, especially students, and get some ideas of some good metrics to use. Along with that, we talked about feedback, but there are ways to measure feedback or to get a more streamlined way that you engage and get that feedback. And I already mentioned it, but use cases or real world applications, these give us a way to demonstrate the impact. And all these things together, whether it's the usage metrics and the ways that you've formalized your feedback process and the way that you can measure how the application is really being used, these can help support future funding and more collaboration. So this is all part of making this as sustainable as possible. Once again, the Tethys Geoscience Foundation is here to help. So we offer multiple ways for you to showcase your work. I'm showing just one of the pages here, but we have more webinars like this one. But we're continuing to expand on that, and we can encompass more of our community in these webinars in the future. We also have application showcases. We can talk about that a little bit more in the questions. But we also want to point out that there are community features and opportunities that come up all the time. We do blog posts, we'll do we do newsletters, and I will get to this next. We have summits, really engaging and helpful events that bring our community together. All these things can really help provide you the opportunity not just to connect with your user community, but really increase your visibility. So let's talk about the summit. We had our first Tethys Summit last year in Tampa, Florida. This year, we're excited to announce that we will be in Chicago, Illinois. The Gleacher Center is a University of Chicago School of Business facility. I know it well. In the time that I spent in Chicago, really, it's a lovely facility. So if you could join us there, I would encourage you to do so. It is right on the Chicago River at the Riverwalk in the heart of the best part of the city, if you ask me. This will be this summer, June 17th and 18th. That's the Wednesday, Thursday. You can find out more information about how you can register and book travel and the place to stay. We're featuring the Palmer House Hilton. And we'd love for you to join us. But more importantly, it's another opportunity to share your app, whether formally or informally. So these summits have become a dedicated space for the Tethys Geoscience Foundation community to come together. You'd be surprised how much you learn from other people during these. You'll not just share applications, but our summit is designed to demonstrate the tools, and we'll have workshops and hands-on, and we'll have inspiring talks to give people new ideas. And it's really designed to build and strengthen a lot of partnerships. So I'm going to wrap this up by talking about an action plan and some key takeaways. We'll start with the action plan, a couple of do's and don'ts. Obviously, I've laid out some really great ideas, but let's make this concrete. Here's a roadmap that you could use. Start by publishing and documenting your application. Maybe say that the other way around, documenting and publishing, but they kind of, it's a little iterative. You'll want to then share that broadly or widely with the community. This is part of your engagement. You'll engage more deeply than just sharing this. You'll want to engage in some of the ways we talked about, iterate based on feedback that you get, because you're not just sharing your application and publishing the documentation, you're asking for their engagement with you. And you'll want to continue to look for opportunities to showcase your work. So this really just gives you, a pretty straightforward way to get going and get started. However, you'll want to avoid a couple of pitfalls, which, plague a lot of people, especially developers. So don't wait until everything is perfect. I know you've probably heard this in many different contexts, but it is really important to keep that in mind. Software will never be perfect. If you think of it as something that will only get better once it's shared, it will help you to let go. So definitely let go when it gets to the point where it's usable enough for some people to give you really meaningful feedback. That's your time to get it out there. And once again, I can't say this enough, you're really going to watch your technical messaging. It's not as though you don't have to simplify it to the point where you've lost your message, but you want to be really careful that you're using the type of terminology that your users will really, connect with, understand, and it won't put them off. They don't have to go look up too many things or you're going to push them away. And then with this, it can be really important to be careful that you're not ignoring feedback. It's not an all or nothing thing. Sometimes you'll get feedback and you'll decide that it's, maybe it's not enough feedback for you to really act on yet, but park it somewhere and watch for more feedback to sort of, bolster that particular perspective. It's really important to think about feedback as a way for you to, continue to iterate this work, even if you don't take it lock, stock, and barrel 100% the way that the feedback is given. It is a communication. It is an engagement and a partnership working with the users. So as a next step, I would encourage you to either develop your app now, or if you already have it, share it in the next month. So share it sometime by the end of May, we'll say. Connect with at least one new collaborator and participate in upcoming Tethys events that we have going on. Key takeaways, wrapping this up, community isn't just important, but it amplifies the impact of your application. Promoting is not just essential, it's really crucial for you to get your app out there and to make it better. And let's not forget that ongoing engagement is what really, really drives the sustainability of your application and how it's adopted and used over time. So I thank you for your time, and hopefully this was really helpful. And I will pause now and see if there are any questions.
Well, I guess I would like to jump in. I feel like there's a great opportunity on our socials to connect with people. Go ahead and post on LinkedIn or a link to your app or what you're doing, and go ahead and feel free to tag Tethys Geoscience in whatever you're working on. And I think that's a great way to help. Easy way to leverage our resources, to have people come in and comment and give yourself more visibility on your projects. Would you
Yeah.
agree?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. I think one of the things people think if they're already doing something that they're doing enough, and it's like, you'd be surprised. You have to keep pushing yourself to try as many different outlets and as many different processes as possible. Engagement can feel really difficult, but and I think we've talked about this, Jeff, that if if you're nervous about, you're not feeling like the most outgoing person, keep in mind that many times, especially in the geosciences, you're communicating with like-minded people. You're networking with people who also feel awkward about networking, so you're in good company.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of welcoming people in Tethys Geoscience who are ready to help out.
Absolutely.
Anyways, so I think that's all we have for now. And so
Great.
I'd like to thank you for being with us today. And I will remind her, and I think look forward to our next webinar. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.